Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if I had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. That was actually a poem written by Robert Frost, and George and a lot of us fans know that this poem has influenced him in his writing style. We do know that the duality of ice and fire exists throughout this story and in the TV show to a level in which it's insane. Honestly, what I take away from that poem is the fact that the world's gonna end, and it doesn't matter how, whether it's by ice or by fire, the end result will be the same. In this video, we're going to be discussing the duality of ice and fire and how that will play a hand in the finale of Game of Thrones. This video will contain minor spoilers in regards to filming, so go ahead and click out of the video right now if you don't want to know anything about Game of Thrones Season 8. Without getting too much into detail, we do know that one major theme that's been happening with these filming is that there's green screens everywhere, there's battles everywhere, and that's going to be a major theme in this final season. One of the things that got me introduced into the show and what made me start liking it was the intense battle scenes. The fact that we could have such a real enactment of what a battle might have been like back in the medieval times on screen, for the most part, minus dragons and, you know, some other magic entities. But besides that, for the most part, battles are realistic, and that's what got me drawn into the show. So for this final season, and with these filming spoilers, we know that battles are going to be playing a heavy theme. Now, this is kind of contradictory because the show has kind of gone down this path where it's almost, at certain points in certain episodes, it almost glorifies war, when we do know that George R. R. Martin is a pacifist, and he honestly hates the idea of war. Part of the reason why he wrote these novels was to show everyone how war is a bad thing and how it's not necessarily the best way to go about doing things. One thing that we have to realize here is that the show has a different type of audience than the book readers. A lot of people who read the novella have open and expanded minds, and George has lots of pages where he can explain and have these, you know, drawn out badass war scenes, but also explain how negative they are in the following chapters, and then we see, you know, what kind of repercussions it has throughout his world. The TV show has to kind of narrow that down and simplify it for the people that watch TV. These kinds of people like boobs, we like dragons, and we like war. So I think this is kind of why the show has made it the way it has, where war plays a heavier theme. It's not necessarily glorifying it, but it's making it more entertaining for the people who are watching. Before we get into the theory, I'm going to go ahead and mention my thoughts on some of the more recent filming spoilers. A few weeks ago, maybe about 2 weeks now, we had some images of what could potentially be a battle at Winterfell. We had dozens of puppet bodies strewn out, very similar to how we did when we were, you know, catching leaks from the filming of the Battle of the Bastards back in season 6. It was very similar to that. And then also there were a few stains on the Winterfell set walls that a lot of people were thinking blood. My thoughts on this battle is the fact that it might be an actual battle. We do know that the Night King raises his forces from the dead as soon as he kills them. So why would we have this long drawn out shot of these battles on, or these bodies rather, on this battlefield of this battle that just took place outside of Winterfell? If it's the Night King, why would he not have immediately raised them, and there wouldn't be a chance for an insane shot like we had on the Battle of the Bastards where they went through and showed all the dead bodies? We don't have time for that. The Night King or the White Walkers, they turn the dead back into whites as soon as they kill them. So my thoughts on this battle right here is the fact that this may be an actual battle, like a skirmish between forces of the living, not living and the dead, just forces of the living skirmish. Now, I've actually done a prediction where I think Cersei is going to send the Golden Company up north to destroy Winterfell so that the Starks have nowhere to run after they battle the Night King, or if the Night King, you know, pushes them to the brink, they have nowhere to set up and defend themselves. So if you want to know more about that, you can actually click at the video right here. A few of my other thoughts as far as the stain on the wall right here, I don't necessarily know if that could be blood. It's definitely dingy in that similar color of what you would expect blood to look like when it dries, but I honestly think these could be burn marks. Whether it's from a dragon's flame or it's from Cersei's Golden Company, we did get shots of Winterfell actually burning and being on fire. So I think that these could be scorch marks. This one is a more recent spoiler as of yesterday. There was an announcement that Game of Thrones is going to be looking to cast 2 twins. And this actually comes to me courtesy of Watchers on the Wall. There's a link down below in the description where you can go straight to their page and go read this article for yourself. But basically, they speculate the reason why twins are being casted is because it's for a young role, and a lot of the times to get around, like, you know, the working hours for kids, you can't work too long. A lot of the ways they get around that is by using twins so that you have, you know, these 2 actors who look very similar playing the same role ultimately. I don't look at it like that. I kind of took a step back and I'm like, I feel like, yeah, it's definitely a possibility, especially since the role they're looking for is such a young person. It's supposed to be, you know, between the ages of like, I think it's 6 to 8. If that's the case, then yes, that totally would be possible. But honestly, we know that Game of Thrones plays around with the age in the description. We know that some characters that were cast as said to be like 60 years old, they ended up being in their 20s. So Game of Thrones is known to play around with casting calls and change the age around a little bit. Now, I would not be surprised if, since this is the finale and we're getting all of this background information on what makes our characters works, I wouldn't be surprised if this is a flashback to when Jaime and Cersei were children. Maybe when they were the age of adolescence. Like, so we're saying like maybe 12 or 13, and we find out what made them first fall in love. Or maybe we find out some traumatic event that happened to them that they shared and bonded over, and this is what caused them to start fornicating with each other. I honestly think that this twins casting call is for a flashback to when Jaime and Cersei were children, and then this would lead into, you know, we have this flashback maybe right before Cersei kills Jaime or Jaime kills Cersei. Now, I don't think that Cersei's gonna die. I think she's gonna be one of the last people left alive, but I think this casting call for twins is for an actual flashback of the younger Lannister siblings. Now, with all this news of these battles and everything that's going to be happening, it's kind of hard to predict who's fighting who in these battles. We do know that a lot of them, some of these people on the ground do look like Unsullied, but for the most part, it's almost impossible to tell for sure who's fighting who, because a lot of what's going on in these battles, we haven't been able to catch too many glimpses of. So when you look at it as a whole and you take a step back, I honestly made a prediction a few months ago that I said, I feel like Game of Thrones in this final season needs to have long battle scenes that last either entire episodes or multiple episodes. And it seems like that's what they're going with, because one of the major things that we keep finding out is like, oh, there's a new green screen here, there's new extras being filmed here, it's hundreds of them, they're all wearing Dothraki or Unsullied armor or whatever. We do know that the main theme is going to be battles in Game of Thrones Season 8. So with that being said, we know someone who has the biggest army in all of Westeros, who is now officially in, you know, the south of the wall anyways, the Night King. We do know that he's going to be engaging in, if not all, most of these battles. And there will come a point where he will have to replenish his forces, because we do know that the Fiery Hand is coming over, and anyone who dies, well, for the most part, anyone of major significance who dies on Jon's side could potentially be brought back by these R'hllor priests. So when the Night King is fighting Jon Snow and Daenerys' army, not only does she have dragons, but she also has a team of priests who can do pseudo the same thing that the Night King can do. I think his forces are going to be drastically decreased. He's going to need to re-up somehow. Another one of my predictions was the fact that, you know, in Season 7, Episode 7, we had the mention from Jon and Tyrion. Tyrion says that there's 1 million people living in King's Landing. In the novels, it's more about 500,000, but either way, we know that there's 1 million people in King's Landing. We also know that the ruler of King's Landing is not the best. She could care less about the millions of people that live in her city. She honestly only wants to protect herself. So when it comes to fighting the Night King, she's going to be the least prepared. Jon Snow and Daenerys have armed their people with dragonglass. Jon is going to continue to do this, and he's going to continue to prepare his people and Daenerys' people for the long nights. Well, Cersei, the same, however, cannot be said. She doesn't care about these people. She's going to leave them the first chance he gets. So this is the perfect opportunity for the Night King to go down south and recuperate his forces. I honestly don't even think there will be much of a fight. I feel like it's just going to be the Night King walking into King's Landing and basically taking over the place. I honestly see that Jon and Daenerys have to go to Winterfell and rescue whoever's there and fly them off to some island in which the Night King can't get to while they think of a better plan to attack him. During this process, this is when the Night King is going to continue his march down south, taking out everyone on his way, ultimately gets to King's Landing and makes his army twice the size that it was before he ever arrived. When he does this, I honestly believe that he'll turn King's Landing into his main center point for his invasion. If he's smart, he will do so. If you remember north of the wall, they have a place where they take all of these children that Craster was putting up for sacrifice. White Walkers take them north of the wall, and there's the Altar of Winter where he turns them into White Walkers. Who's to say he doesn't do this with King's Landing? He makes these giant ice structures pop up everywhere. He gets super confident. He realizes that it's only a matter of time before the living are dead and ultimately join his side. So he just kind of sets up camps in King's Landing. Little does he know, there are caches of wildfire underneath King's Landing all over the freaking place. And if you'll remember, which I'm sure a lot of us do, there was a vision which Daenerys had in the House of the Undying in which she walked through the throne room, the roof was caved in, there was what could be snow or ash falling from the sky, and it just looks as though King's Landing is completely devastated either by winter or from war. I honestly think that it's a mix of both. We do know that the Night King can control the weather. This would make sense as to why he would bring the snow and the storm with him to King's Landing. And then, you know, you have these places that could potentially be burned because obviously Daenerys would eventually have to go there and fight with her dragons. So if you have that theme of the House of the Undying, then you also have Bran's visions of a dragon flying over King's Landing. You kind of have to piece that all together, and when you do, or when I do at least, and this relates back to that Robert Frost poem, I honestly see this King's Landing being the culmination of the Battle of Ice and Fire. Like, yes, Jon Snow and Daenerys physically represent them, but the actual battle itself will take place in King's Landing. I think the Night King, and this, you know, requires a little bit of tinfoil, but I think the Night King may eventually turn King's Landing, if he feels comfortable enough, back into sort of like the Lands of Always Winter. Just make giant ice appear out of everywhere as sort of like a defense for this city. But like I said, he doesn't realize that there are wildfire caches underneath King's Landing. So one of the ways that these characters that are kind of just sitting on the sidelines who aren't actively participating in the battles, well, this is where they show up. Varys knows the underground network of King's Landing. He can get in and out of King's Landing without actually being seen and without actually having to walk the streets. So if you have someone like Varys who's still alive in game and he can be around to advise the future leaders, that's kind of not really fair because they're relying on the past to help rebuild the future. And honestly, that's one of the best things to do, but that's not the way this show is going. You have to completely rid yourself of the past to move forward and rebuild this world. So characters like Varys and, you know, Littlefinger, they wouldn't make sense to have them around advising these new leaders, because you can honestly say that, you know, history repeats itself and they may be brought down the same path. So this brings up the perfect opportunity for Varys, who is said to die in a strange land according to Melisandre, to ultimately show his loyalty to Daenerys and kind of lead a small band of maybe Daenerys' army, or maybe just people who are willing to do this. Basically leads them underneath King's Landing, and they set off strategically these caches of wildfire that are placed throughout the city. When they do this, I believe this will ultimately destroy the Night King's army for good, and this will leave him and maybe a few other White Walkers alive, and he will likely fly off with his dragon. At this point in Season 8, this would mean that the major threat is gone, and the last threat is the Night King, and then, you know, I could mention how I think the Night King is going to die in this video, but I've done several other videos on how exactly I think the Night King would die. You could actually click right up here, and this will take you to a link that I did of a video where I mentioned how I think it is possible to kill the Night King. If this is the case, and I'm right, and this final battle of ice and fire, if you will, takes place in King's Landing, because King's Landing has been the source of so much, you know, hate and just problematic causing for our main characters for such a long time, it would only make sense that the city gets completely wiped out, destroyed, and is able to be rebuilt, thus making the bittersweet ending finally fulfill in all of its conclusions. I honestly predict that this battle will, in fact, the final battle rather, will in fact go down at King's Landing, and any sort of skirmish that happens afterwards will just be towards rebuilding the new kingdom. We do know that, for the most part, the center of power in Westeros and the center of corruption and everything that just sucks about this society has been taking place in King's Landing. So it would make sense if King's Landing is destroyed and then we have to rebuild. I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you could, please slap a like on this video. The like goal will be 420. Also, go ahead and follow me on Twitter. I am at Sir_Hunts, and over there you can get all the updates about future videos that I'm doing. Sometimes I hold polls as to allow people to put in input for the next videos that I'm working on. Also, follow me over on Instagram. It's at Sir_Hunts_reviews. That's another good way where I post, kind of, you know, give you a little bit of insight into my personal life and just spam you guys with pictures of my sexy body. I want to thank you all so much again for watching. Super special shout out to every single member of my Patreon family over on patreon.com/SirHuntsReviews. Without all of you guys' love and support, I would ultimately not be able to make this kind of content or these videos. So for that, I want to thank you all so much for your love and support. My name's Mark, and this has been Sir Hunts Reviews. Bears beats Battlestar Galactica. Identity theft is a serious crime, Jim. Millions of families suffer every year. Michael?